For over 4 decades, whispers have swirled through late-night radio shows, fan forums, and dusty tabloids. Rumors of what really went on behind Graceland's locked doors in those final, restless years. But now the silence is breaking. The one woman who stood quietly in the shadows, witnessing the king's most vulnerable, most human moments, is finally ready to speak. What she reveals isn't just surprising. It's the kind of truth that reshapes everything you thought you knew. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't a fan chasing fame or fortune. Letitia Henley Kirk was a nurse, steady, sincere, and grounded in quiet compassion. Long before the world knew her as someone close to Elvis Presley, she was simply doing her job in a Memphis clinic. No cameras, no fanfare. Just a woman with a calm voice and a steady hand, unaware that fate was about to place her at the heart of one of the most enduring legends in music history. It was 1968, and the man who walked into the clinic that day wasn't wearing rhinestones or flashing a stage smile. Elvis Presley in that moment was just a patient, worn down, quiet, and in need of care. Letitia remembered how he lowered his head as the doctor spoke, as if trying to disappear. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, gently lifted his chin, and told him to look at her, directly, confidently. That simple act of respect and firmness did something few others could. It broke through the layers of isolation that surrounded him. Impressed by her quiet strength and country ways, Elvis would reach out to her again a few years later, not just to thank her, but to ask her to join his inner circle. He didn't just want a nurse, he wanted someone he could trust. He hired Letitia personally and even offered her husband a role in his security detail. From that moment on, the Kirks weren't just employees. They were witnesses to a deeply private world few ever saw. What Letitia experienced next would forever change how she viewed the man behind the music. Moving into Graceland was like stepping into another world, a place where time seemed to slow, yet emotions ran at full speed. When Elvis hired Letitia as his personal nurse and welcomed her husband onto the security team, it wasn't just a job offer, it was an invitation into the guarded heart of his kingdom. The mansion, with its velvet curtains and echoing halls, held more than just gold records and glittering jumpsuits. It held the mood swings, the silences, the aching need for connection that no amount of applause could satisfy. Letitia and her husband became fixtures within that strange, extraordinary home. Close enough to be trusted, but always aware of the fragility behind the fame. Elvis had a way about him, a charm so natural and magnetic it could draw people in before they even realized it. He didn't need to raise his voice or demand attention. A glance, a grin, a gentle compliment was usually all it took. Whether he wanted an extra dessert, a late-night conversation, or simply the presence of someone who made him feel grounded, Elvis knew how to make it happen. That irresistible pull of his wasn't just charisma, it was survival. He used it to build a world where he could feel in control, even as the edges of that world quietly began to fray. And yet beneath the glamour and Southern hospitality, Letitia saw something else, something heartbreakingly human. After his split from Priscilla, the woman who had once been his great love, Elvis was surrounded by people but haunted by loneliness. He and Priscilla still spoke often, their bond unbroken in many ways. But the intimacy they once shared had become just another memory in a house filled with them. Letitia noticed the quiet moments most, the pauses between phone calls, the way he sometimes stared off for just a second too long. Graceland was always full, but Elvis's heart carried an emptiness that no entourage could fill. For a brief golden stretch of time, Letitia witnessed something rare at Graceland. Elvis Presley smiling with genuine light in his eyes. That spark came in the form of Linda Thompson, the graceful, intelligent Miss Tennessee, who seemed to reach a part of Elvis that had long been buried. There was a softness in his voice when he spoke to her, a renewed energy in the way he carried himself. Letitia noticed the shift immediately. Gone was the hollow routine of late nights and withdrawn mornings. In its place, for a little while, was laughter echoing down Graceland's long hallways, and a sense of calm that had been missing for far too long. But like so many beautiful things in Elvis's life, the peace didn't last. The weight of his private struggles began to wear on the relationship, and eventually Linda chose to step away. Letitia saw the moment coming. She had felt the tension, the helplessness in Linda's voice during hushed conversations behind closed doors. When the break finally came, it hit Elvis hard. The glow that Linda had brought into his world dimmed, and once again, Graceland felt colder. Elvis withdrew deeper into himself, searching for something that could fill the space she left behind. It was during this time that Letitia saw him turn inward, not just emotionally, but spiritually. Books began to appear beside his bed, worn copies of the Bible, dog-eared pages marked with thoughts he never voiced aloud. Letitia would sometimes find him reading quietly in the early hours of the morning, lost in scripture, looking for something solid to hold on to. Despite his fame and fortune, Elvis seemed to carry a quiet hunger, not for adoration, but for peace. Letitia could see it in the way he clung to those sacred words, as if hoping they might offer answers no one else could give. The glittering lights of the stage began to cast longer, darker shadows as Elvis's physical decline became impossible to ignore. Gone was the vibrant teen idol who once set hearts racing with a single hip shake. In his place stood a man whose body was beginning to betray him. Letitia watched quietly as the pounds crept on, as the tailored jumpsuits had to be adjusted again and again. His performances grew unpredictable. Some nights he would shine with flashes of the old brilliance. Other nights he barely made it through a set. And when the curtain closed, he often retreated into the sanctuary of Graceland, shutting himself off from a world that once adored him. To those on the outside, it may have looked like Elvis was simply exhausted or distracted, but Letitia saw the truth etched into the lines on his face. He wasn't just tired, he was ashamed. There was a sadness in his eyes that deepened with every missed note, every critical headline. Fame, once his crown, had become a weight he could no longer carry. He hated the man the mirror reflected back at him. There were days when frustration boiled beneath the surface, when he lashed out not in anger, but in despair. Letitia, ever patient, stayed by his side through it all, bearing witness to a slow unraveling the world refused to see. In the shadows of that unraveling, a new dependence quietly took hold. Prescription bottles lined the bathroom counters, tucked into drawers, and found in nightstands, each one promising sleep, relief, or energy, depending on what the moment demanded. Elvis had begun to rely on them more and more, chasing a fragile balance his own body could no longer provide. Letitia could only watch as the medications became part of his daily rhythm, woven into his routine like lyrics in a song he couldn't stop singing. What began as a crutch was becoming a chain, and deep down she feared he knew it too. The deeper Elvis sank into dependence, the more tangled the web around him became. Letitia began to notice just how many sources he had at his fingertips when it came to getting what he wanted. If one doctor refused to write a prescription, another would step in. If one pharmacy raised questions, a different one, often in a different state, wouldn't blink twice. It wasn't just one supplier or one method. It was a revolving door of access, spread across cities and carried out in whispers and quiet deliveries. Letitia knew that this wasn't simple overuse. It was something far more systemic, something woven into the lifestyle that surrounded him. Desperate to steer him in a healthier direction, Letitia tried everything she could. She adjusted his meals, swapped rich Southern comfort food for lighter, balanced options. She encouraged fresh fruit, smaller portions, and home-cooked alternatives. But no matter how carefully she planned, her efforts were no match for the cravings and habits that had taken root. The kitchen staff took orders from Elvis, not from a nurse. And when his mood dipped or the frustration grew, all it took was a craving and a few words to send his favorites straight to the table. Letitia wasn't just losing a battle with food. She was watching a man slip further away from control. Behind much of this access stood a name that would become infamous in Elvis's later years. Dr. George Nick Nicopolis, known simply as Dr. Nick. While Letitia never publicly accused him of wrongdoing, it was no secret that Dr. Nick played a central role in managing and supplying Elvis's growing list of medications. When the bottles at home ran low, Elvis would vanish briefly, reappearing from places like Palm Springs, Los Angeles, or Las Vegas with everything he needed to keep going. To the world, he was still the king, but Letitia, watching quietly from the sidelines, knew that something far more fragile was keeping him upright. and it had nothing to do with stage lights. It began like so many other mornings at Graceland, quiet, subdued, and tinged with the stillness that often followed Elvis's long, restless nights. Letitia, though not present in the house that day, had grown familiar with the rhythm of his routine. He had taken his usual medications, the ones meant to lull him into the sleep that so often evaded him. But that morning something was different. The first dose didn't work, nor did the second. Time slipped by, and the king of rock and roll remained wide awake in the early light, pacing the halls of a house that had once echoed with music and laughter. In a moment of desperation, he reached out, first to his aunt, Delta, and then to his nurse's office. Letitia later recalled that third request with a heavy heart. It wasn't unusual for Elvis to push for more when sleep wouldn't come. Against her instincts and with the approval of his doctor, another dose was given, this one including a pair of powerful sedatives. Letitia wasn't with him physically, but she knew how quickly things could turn. And that morning, things turned for the worse. Elvis returned to his room, supposedly to rest, but what followed would bring Graceland to a standstill. Hours passed before his fiancée realized something was wrong. He had told her he was going to the bathroom, but he never came back. The house grew silent, save for the mounting anxiety that began to creep in. When she finally went searching, the scene she found was one burned into memory. Elvis, unresponsive on the floor, still and silent. A frantic call to emergency services was placed. Paramedics arrived within minutes and raced him to Baptist Memorial Hospital, but the rush came too late. By 3:30 p.m., the world received a devastating announcement. And yet, as headlines swirled, Letitia was left with something far more haunting, the weight of what had led to that final, irreversible moment. In the quiet days that followed, Letitia found herself replaying the timeline over and over in her mind, haunted by the what-ifs. Could faster medical intervention have changed the outcome? Could a different choice, a firmer no to that final dose, have turned the tide? These questions followed her like shadows, lingering in the background of her thoughts no matter how many years passed. She knew the fine line Elvis had been walking for so long, and she also knew how swiftly that line could vanish beneath someone's feet. There were no clear answers, only an aching sense that things didn't have to end the way they did. As the world mourned a legend, Letitia mourned something more personal. She didn't just lose a patient, she lost a man she had come to care for deeply. Elvis wasn't the tabloid caricature the world liked to dissect. He was thoughtful, often gentle, and at times heartbreakingly fragile. Letitia carried the sorrow of seeing him misunderstood in life, and then even more so in death. The spotlight he once commanded had distorted his story, reducing a deeply human struggle into sensational headlines. For her, the real tragedy was that the world never truly knew the man behind the music, not the way she did. In the wake of his passing, a different kind of story began to take shape. One built not on facts, but on speculation. Whispers spread like wildfire. Sightings in far-off towns, supposed letters from Elvis himself, even claims that his death had been faked. The conspiracy theories spiraled in every direction, fueled by disbelief and the refusal to let go of an icon. Letitia watched these tales unfold, always with a measure of sadness. The world wasn't just mourning Elvis. They were struggling to accept that someone so untouchable could be so mortal. And in that refusal, the truth of his final years remained hidden behind a fog of rumor and imagination. Among the many memories that Letitia carried, one stood out with particular warmth. A moment so tender it lingered like a quiet melody in her heart. It happened one ordinary afternoon at Graceland, long before the world turned somber. Lisa Marie, just a little girl then, was walking through the hallways when she stopped in front of a large velvet painting of her father, one Elvis himself had gifted to Letitia. Without saying a word, Lisa Marie looked up at the portrait, lifted her tiny hand, and blew a kiss toward it. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered, her voice light and pure. Letitia never forgot that moment. It was small, fleeting, but to her it captured something eternal. That memory became a symbol of the man Letitia had come to know, far removed from the headlines and the stage lights. To her, Elvis wasn't just a cultural icon. He was kind, thoughtful, and deeply intelligent. He had a searching soul, always reading, always asking questions that ran deeper than the surface. Though the world knew him for his voice, Letitia knew him for his silences, for the way he listened, prayed, and sought comfort in Scripture during his loneliest hours. His spirit, she often said, was both vulnerable and resilient, a paradox few ever took the time to understand. To her, he wasn't the king of rock and roll, he was just Elvis. Years later, when the world had long since moved on and the glitter of Graceland had become part of music lore, Letitia made a quiet decision. She would share her story, not for profit, not for fame, but as a final tribute to a man she never stopped caring about. In 2015, she self-published her memoir, Taking Care of Elvis, offering a rare, intimate glimpse behind the legend. It was more than just a collection of memories. It was her way of preserving the truth, the humanity in the heart of someone the world thought they knew, but never really did. If this glimpse into Elvis's private world moved you or made you see him in a new light, we'd love to hear what you think. Share your thoughts and memories in the comments below. We read everyone. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you found it meaningful, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more untold stories and rare perspectives like this. And if you know someone who still believes in the mystery, share this video with them too. The conversation is just getting started.